One of the first things to do with the wire, which is round, is to straighten it, because we're going to put it through the rolling mill and we need it to be nice and straight. Also, we have to anneal it, which means soften it. That'll make a very, very nice shape when it goes through the rolling mill. So we will cool this down now, and after cooling, we're going to pickle it, clean it, and then roll it. So the rolling mill is going to do a really great job at making a super square wire, as you can see here. Next, we're going to measure the wires, the square wires, and this is going to be the frame of our piece, and we need to make sure that we get it to the right length in order to fit around the finger. We can also go to a chart and work out what the length should be. Now, I know I want a size 8 ring size, but I also need to know what is the thickness of the wire. So if we want to know the thickness, we have to go to a wire gauge, and we have to test the wire to go through each of the little sections, and we will find out that this particular wire is an 18 gauge wire. So this helps me again because I can go back to my chart, I can look at my size 8, and then I can look at the 18 gauge, and this will give me the correct length measurement for my ring, which is about 59.7. So 0.7 will just round it up to about 60. So we're going to mark it off, and then we are going to saw the area, and that'll give us a piece of the right length. In fact, we're going to do that with both pieces, and as soon as we've sawn both pieces, we're going to put them together into the ring clamp, and with a big file, we're going to go ahead and file them. So now they're the right length, which is about 60 millimeters. So my next step is to form and shape. So holding them together and with a flat nose plier, I'm going to just peel the wires back a little bit, and this will give them a very interesting shape. It gives me a space in which I can put the small filigree wires. Some of this is done by hand. As you can see, the wire is easy to bend and shape once it's been annealed. So as soon as we've got that nice shape, then we have to solder the edges together. So we make sure that those edges are really touching. They have to be together. And once they are touching, then we can get on with the soldering. So now we're going to solder those pieces together. We're going to first put them into flux. The flux is very important because it helps the solder to flow. Solder is a material that melts a little bit sooner than the two pieces you're soldering will melt. So we put our two pieces, our two wires together, make sure that they're touching. The little pieces of solder are directly underneath the joined areas, and then we are going to heat it up on a special ceramic brick. And as we heat it up, it's going to become red hot. The solder will flow, attaching the areas together. This done, we can then put it into the cold water to cool it down, and then we're going to pickle and clean it. Next, we metal form a piece that will go into the center. I'm going to take another piece of the square wire and just wrap it around this steel tool in the size that is going to accommodate the bezel. So as you can see, we're wrapping it quite tightly here, and we just have to saw through the overlap. So gripping it in my gripping tool with my saw, I can go ahead and saw right through. Once it's sawn, then I make sure that the two ends, the two open ends, are connected, and I can also put my small bezel on top, and I'm going to solder all of those parts together. Now, because this is a very small item, and especially because the bezel has a very, very thin thickness and can melt quite quickly, what we're going to do is we're going to put the heavier wire metal that is underneath, we're going to put the small bezel on top, and we're going to heat and solder from the bottom. So for this reason, we're using a tripod, which will be much easier than doing it from the top and melting down the bezel. You can see the little pallions of solder on the base. Then we can go ahead and put the bezel directly onto the small pallions. These are hard pallions, meaning they melt at a slightly higher temperature. Make sure that it's all centralized, look at it from every angle, and then come from the bottom with the heat and make sure that we solder the bezel to the base. It's only going to take a few seconds because they're both small items, so they'll both heat up fairly fast. Great, you can see that happening. So as soon as that is ready, then we're going to cool it in the water and pickle it and clean it. These are the small wires that we're going to use to do the filigree. So before making these wires either square or twisting them, we have to anneal them to make them really soft. The softer they are, the easier they will twist, and we'll get a very beautiful pattern on them. So cooling, pickling, cleaning, and now we're going to see how we take that square wire and twist it. We're going to grip it in one side very firmly. We will just stretch it out straight and put it into the wire twisting tool. This is a really fun tool. Every time I just pull a little bit, it causes the wire to literally turn and twist to get that beautiful shape. So we have to cut these wires down into smaller shapes in order to anneal them, so then we can bend and shape and form them again. These are the finished pieces. This is what we want. We want to do some beautiful little patterns with the wire. So how do we get the wire into this pattern? I'm going to start with a round nose plier, and when we have the right length and we've cut them all to the same length, make sure we measure to check that they are the same length. Then one by one, we'll grip them with the round side of the plier, and we'll start off with a nice loop right on the inside of the design. Then little by little, we're going to just loosely wrap and shape. Small wires like this can very easily be wrapped and shaped into any shape that you want them into. The trick is to make every little piece similar or matching. So once those pieces are made, the next step is to fit them into the main base of the ring, the one we sorted earlier. And we can see how we can now attach all the different parts. Once all the parts are in the right place and they're looking matching, then we're going to solder them all so that they are well connected. So first the flux, everything has to be fluxed really well. Then we have lots of little pallions of the silver solder, and these pallions are going to be very strategically placed all over the design to make sure that every section gets fused into the right location. Again, we use the tripod in order that we don't melt down the small wires. It's easier to heat it from the bottom, and also to see the pallions as they fuse come down and through, because usually they follow the heat. So it's a very small heat, not a very high heat, but the piece itself is really heating up. As soon as we get all of the wires and the base at the same temperature, those little pallions will start to fuse and the whole thing will be soldered. So then it goes into the water and we need to pickle it, and then we can clean it up. Now cleanup comes in several different forms. One of the first stages of cleanup would be to sand. all over the piece, make sure it's well sanded. Then we're going to take bristle brushes and get into the little nooks and the little crannies. Make sure to clean up those areas really, really well. Then we have silicone tips. Silicone tips do a great job at smoothing the surface. And now that everything is looking clean and smooth, we're going to wrap it around the mandrel, give it a few hammers so that it comes into the shape that we want and into the size that we want. We can actually push it down the mandrel to the point where we get our size 8. The back of the shank needs to be soldered. We're going to do that with pick soldering. So little piece of solder is going to be connecting the two ends that came together, and the whole ring has to be heated, but once it's heated, that little bit of pallion of silver will solder the two ends very accurately. At this point, once we've cleaned it, we come back and we can hammer it round, make sure that it is the right size, the size 8. And there might be a little bit of filing to do at the very back to clean up the solder. And then we start with a little bit of polishing. So we have different ways to polish. We have sandpaper polishing. The sides can be very nicely polished with sandpaper. And then the other areas, a little bit difficult to get into, we have silicone tips of different types and of course of different grits. So we'll work with the different silicone tips until everything is really clean and ready to set the stone. Now we've put the stone in, and with a setting tool, this one is called the Bezel pusher, we're going to use that bezel pusher to literally push the tip of the bezel down onto the cabochon. A little bit at a time, first one part, then go opposite, do the opposite, and when we've been all the way around, opposite, 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 until we've got the entire bezel wrapped around the stone, we can then use the bezel roller. And the bezel roller just makes sure to smoothen everything down onto the stone. A final cleanup with the silicone tips will be necessary. This doesn't hurt the stone, but it just makes sure that your metal is nice and shiny. So here we see the finished product. It looks interesting. It's got the ancient filigree technique, a few other pieces for you to see here that were done in exactly the same style. Some are a little bit more intricate than others. This fish, for example, we've also added some granulation technique. But certainly filigree is one of the fun things to create.